It's become fashionable in the life sciences industry to use the word ecosystem. If you read the industry media or you listen at a conference, it won't be long before you hear phrases like patient-centered ecosystem or innovation ecosystem or oncology ecosystem. But the word is used very, very loosely without being clear about what it means. So more often than not, ecosystem is used as a synonym for a part of the market or a relationship between different organisations within the market. But thinking about our industry as an ecosystem has so much more value than sounding fashionably smart. And in this video, I'll guide you through how ecological thinking helps to address real-world challenges in the life sciences market. To an ecologist, an ecosystem is a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. This definition helps us to see that ecosystems in the life sciences industry are not simply subparts of the market or the industry. Ecosystems have wide boundaries that blur and overlap with other ecosystems. This definition also emphasises complex interaction, which is central to understanding how our industry works. Ecologists also subdivide ecosystems into the biotic and the abiotic. Biotic is all of the biological organisms in an ecosystem, and abiotic is the non-biological elements such as geology and climate. Ecologists understand that the biotic components of the ecosystem adapt not only to each other but also to the abiotic environment. And to a lesser extent, but an important degree sometimes, the biotic component also influences the abiotic, such as when rainforests shape the weather and grazing animals change surface geology. As we will see, these fundamental concepts of biological ecology become useful when we think about how the life science industry works. If we think of ecosystems in the same way that an ecologist does, it gives us a powerful and practical way to understand our industry. Firstly, it's best to think of the life sciences ecosystem broadly rather than narrowly. It doesn't really make any sense to talk about an oncology ecosystem, for example, when it is connected to most of the therapy areas at the manufacturer level, the user level, and the patient level. Similarly, when we're describing the innovation ecosystem, we have to remember that it's very closely connected to peer systems and to publicly funded basic research. So it's better to think of things like oncology and innovation as part of the wider life sciences ecosystem, just like the tree canopy and ground vegetation are part of the rainforest ecosystem. The life sciences ecosystem is a community of interacting commercial, governmental, non-profit and other organisations that are embedded in their sociological and technological environment. Using this wider biology type definition of our industry ecosystem also means that our industry is intimately connected with adjacent ecosystems such as the health provider ecosystem and the government finance ecosystem. The second useful idea we can borrow from the biological ecologists is the biotic-abiotic division. Looked at that way, the life sciences ecosystem includes a biotic component of many different species of organisation, from pharmaceutical device and diagnostic companies to distributors to contract organisations to regulators, health technology assessment organisations. As in any ecosystem, these species are interdependent and are in a constant state of co-evolution and adaptation. We see this in the way that drug developers and regulators co-evolve their processes, for example. But we also see it in the way that big companies have adapted to work with small, innovative companies. Overall, a truly ecological perspective helps us to see our industry as a massively interconnected network, just as a coral reef is a network of biological organisms. This thinking also applies to the abiotic part of the ecosystem. Biological organisms adapt to geology and climate, and pharma and medtech companies have to adapt to their sociological and technological environments. The sociological environment includes laws and regulations, but also political systems, demographics and social attitudes. The technological environment encompasses both directly relevant technologies, CRISPR for example, but also indirectly relevant technologies such as information technology. And just as biological organisms can shape weather and geology, life science businesses can shape their sociological and technological environments. Consider, for example, how control of infectious diseases has shaped the demographic and epidemiological trends, or how companies such as Illumina have shaped the availability of genomic information. Overall, understanding that the biotic life science companies coexist and co-evolve with abiotic sociological and technological environments is an important step towards understanding the complexity of our industry. And transferring these concepts from biology to business, as opposed to simply throwing the word ecosystem around, is of more than academic interest. It has many practical implications. So, for example, we often talk of the changing pharma business model or the evolving medtech business model. But from an ecosystem perspective, this is naive and simplistic. In biological ecosystems, the evolutionary struggle for survival leads to speciation and biodiversity. And my research into the evolution of the life science industry reveals the same speciation process. There is no longer a pharma business model, there are many. The medtech business model is not simply evolving, it is diversifying into many related but distinct business models. Now, practically speaking, this means that life sciences firms have to understand that process of speciation and to choose what sort of business model they want to evolve into. Biologists also talk about holobionts, which are interdependent networks of distinct organisms that work together to survive. So a coral reef is a holobiont, but so are you with your gut microbiome. In nature, one holobiont competes against another holobiont. The same is true in the life sciences industry, where, because of external innovation and outsourcing, no company competes alone anymore. This tells us that from an ecosystem perspective, the idea of one company competing against another is, again, too simple. In practice, it means that life science firms need to build their capabilities to attract and retain partners, and the holobiont concept has many lessons for how to do this. In ecology, a keystone species is one that is widely connected to other species in the ecosystem. The concept's important because changes that affect a keystone species impact across the whole ecosystem. For example, bees and starfish are both kinds of keystone species. In the life sciences ecosystem, elite universities and teaching hospitals are examples of keystone species. So too are certain global innovator companies. Functionally, being aware of the keystone organisations in the life sciences ecosystem helps life science companies to drive change in clinical practice and to develop innovative markets. Some biological organisms can modify the abiotic environment to improve their evolutionary fitness. Beavers, when they build dams, is one example, but earthworms, termites, and of course humans also change their own environment rather than just adapt to it. The concept of niche construction is important in explaining the success of certain species. In the life sciences ecosystem, some companies have extensively influenced their own environment. We see this, for example, in the rare disease business. From a real-world perspective, niche construction activity is sometimes a better competitive strategy than simple adaptation to the environment. Again, biology has important lessons for business here. Habitats are regions with specific characteristics and are populated by specific species. Desert, forest, grassland and ocean are all examples of biological habitats. The concept is important to understanding why certain species thrive or fail in different regions. In the life sciences industry, habitats are defined by how value is created and for whom. For example, many innovative life science companies are limited to the habitat where value is created for institutional players via technological innovation. By contrast, Some generic pharmaceutical companies operate in the habitats where value is created by operational efficiency and for either institutional payers or for consumers. So the application of the habitat concept helps life science companies both plan their growth and to anticipate their competition. When ecologists manage ecosystems, they use an idea called holism, which is the opposite of reductionism. From an ecologist perspective, it's foolish to do one thing to an ecosystem and expect a single direct consequence. The complex interconnectivity of an ecosystem always leads to indirect effects. So that means that ecosystems can only be managed by adjusting multiple factors at once in order to keep the system in balance. The concept of holism applies well to the life sciences ecosystem too. For example, the introduction of Sovaldi and Havani transformed hepatitis C management, but had unintended consequences for the financing of some health systems. The Human Genome Project didn't have the immediate direct consequence that some people talk about, but it had wider indirect results. And the passage of a single act in the US, Hatch-Waxman, was intended to improve competitiveness, but it also transformed the global generics business. So understanding the holistic nature of the market is essential to crafting strategy in the life sciences. When executives in the life sciences industry set out to manage their businesses, they rely on a paradigm that shapes their thinking. For many years, the pipeline metaphor was one of those. Others have seen the industry as a garden where tending to basic research grows new medicines. But like all metaphors, these have their limits. The ecosystem paradigm, by contrast, is a much more useful paradigm for anyone wanting to understand the global life sciences industry. It's much more than a metaphor. In fact, it's the only way to really make sense of the most important industry in the world.